Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today we have an amazing story of God's power. We're going to be talking with Lisa Garcia, who has an incredible story of coming to Christ. She was in gangs when she was young. She was addicted to heroin for many, many years. She was in prison for many, many years. She was also a lesbian. And we're going to hear her story. It's incredible. So please welcome Lisa Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. So let's hear your story. So when you were growing up, when you were young, you grew up in Whittier, California, and
Yeah.
you say you came from a good family. So talk about that, and then how you ended up in a gang or
Well,
hanging around with gangs.
right. No, my family, I came from a really good family. Consists of my mother, my father, my sister, and my two brothers, Pastor Eric and Pastor Marty. And our upbringing was very good. I just happened to go out and beyond because I was like the scapegoat, I guess you want to call it. And I went my own way. And when I was about 14 years old, I started hanging around with gangs. At first, it was just a bunch of people. It was just a bunch of friends, but we developed this gang, and today it's known as one of the biggest gangs today. But so I started hanging out with them more and more, and less time with my family. And I don't know, I just felt more like I had more attention, I guess, from the gangs because I know my brothers and my sister, they were all doing good. And like I said, I was the one that took off and just went my own way. And so I started hanging with them, and I was the type that was very bold. I wanted to try new things, different things. And that's how I ended up in a lot of trouble, by just being that boldness, just being that one that wanted to
Mhm.
get involved. And so when I was with the gangs, I was with them, gosh, up until right before when I got married, almost when I was 20 years old, because I ended up getting into an organization, mafia, and that took a turn. And
And so what did your parents think of you being in this gang environment?
well, they didn't really know how to act because I guess because I would bring all my friends to the house and my mother would cook for them, and the gang never disrespected my family. They always took care of my family. So they didn't really see it as wrong. I mean, because we never did anything wrong in front of them. I should put it that way.
Right.
So it was just like a bunch of friends coming over, but the more and more when I was already too involved, I know my mother worried a lot. My father worked, he was a workaholic. He was never home, always working. So my mother got the bulk of it, but she just did a lot of praying, I guess. You know,
Yeah. And
yeah.
and so what happened? So then you ended up getting married to a man when you were 18 years old. Is that right?
Yes, yes. I I started feeling these feelings of being gay when I was like, as far as I remember, like about 5 years old. But I just kind of brushed it off and put it to the side. And I started using drugs like when I was about 15. My first joint, I think I smoked when I was 8 years old. And I started when I was with the gangs, I started using drugs, smoking weed, then we got into cocaine. And so I still had those feelings, those tendencies of being with the woman, but I got married for society reasons because back in my day, it was like hush hush,
Yeah. It was
it wasn't out,
don't ask, don't tell. Yeah.
right. It wasn't as open as it is today. I'll tell you that much. But yes, I did. I got married when I was 18 to my daughter's father, and I was married
Did he
for about,
know that you had like gay tendencies or
he kind of, I think he sensed it, but he was like real macho, machismo, I guess you say in this in Hispanic, and he didn't want to admit it, but I know when we parted our ways, I did tell him, and he was like, "Oh my gosh," he flipped. I don't know how else to say it.
And how long were you married to him?
I was married for 7 years. They
7
say the
years.
7 year itch, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
so
then I
what
had my,
happened after you divorced him? Well, first of all, when you were married, you moved to Watts, right?
right, I was staying with him, and before I got married, we lived with his parents in Watts. That's where, we stayed for about 2 years until we got married.
And what was that like, living in Watts?
Ah, it was it was crazy at the time, but then again, I was crazy too back then. I still am in my own way, but in a good way today.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, because I got most of my drugs from over in that area. And see, he was an alcoholic at the time, so it was just like we were both just coming together, and he was drunk all the time. I was high all the time. So, we just I guess we just made it work. We were young, we were in our own worlds, and yeah, like I said, I did a lot of my drugs out there. That's what it was really bad about it. But I would say today it's scary. Would I move back there today? No, because some of the things I did out there and running the streets out there it was crazy. I would never do that, walking the streets at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, which I did back then, which I would never do today. Now that I've come to my senses,
Yeah. And
you know.
so, and then at a certain point, you started doing heroin, right?
Yes, yes. When I was like 18 years old, I got introduced to heroin, and I was a heroin addict for 27 years. That,
Wow.
yeah, that monkey was on my back for a long time. But even prior to that, right after I got married, when I got divorced, I was around 25 years old, and I had my first experience going to jail. And at first it was like, well, I don't want to say a joke, but I was with some friends and they happened to raid this house. I was only 16 years old, and somebody put a syringe in my shoe. So when the cops came and they raided the place, they were taking all of us, and the cop was there telling me, put on your shoes. So I was putting on my shoes and I felt the syringe, but I wasn't going to pull it out. I was scared. But I had told them I was 18 years old and I was only 16. So they booked me and everything. That was my very first experience going to a jail. And they booked me and everything. And then when they found out my real age, well, of course, they called my parents and everything and, questioned me. But that was my very first experience going to jail.
Did they
And
find the syringe in your shoe?
yes, they did. And then they started checking my arms and checking, and they were constantly asking me questions. And by then I was already breaking down and I was crying for my parents. I didn't want to, I never knew I was going to get stuck in that environment because I also did 13 years in women's prison, so, but that was my very first experience. After
And
that, it was like when I was still running with the gang. By this time, I was with the organization and I was going back to back, in prison. I did 9 years in the county jail, and then I did 4 more in the state prison. So I did a total of 13 years. I was locked
wow.
up. Yeah.
And so when you were in prison or jail, county jail, I mean, what were you thinking? How did you feel about that? Did you, think about God? Like what was going through your mind?
Well, it's funny, Beckett, because it's like my family, my brothers and my sister were Christian, and my mom and dad were Catholic. So I came up being like a hard Catholic, at the beginning. And I knew there was a God, and I knew God was watching me, and I had the presence, but I was like really 1 foot in and 1 foot out, still running with the friends, still doing all those things. And I wasn't where I'm at today. No, no. But I know being out there where I was, like even in the streets, running the streets and in South Central LA and Watts. And I mean, just being out there, I mean, God had his hand over me because, I was in situations like I've been shot twice, I was stabbed, I was, all these things. And it's like who else but brought me out of it? I know it was God. I know he had a hand on me.
Yeah. Well, did you, when you were in prison, did you ever pray to God, or did you?
I prayed, but it was always the wrong prayers. It was always like, God, if you get me out of this one, I'll do good the next time. It wasn't serious.
Yeah,
It wasn't
bargaining with God. Yeah.
right. And, I'd go to church because then we could get out to go on Sundays just to get out of the prison cell. It wasn't for all the right reasons. It took me a long time to come to God. But like I said, everything that endured through my time, I'm surprised to be alive today because in my 30s, the way I was running the streets and like after being shot and being beaten up, left for dead. I mean, there were so many things that happened in my life. And like a lot of people ask me, they go, "Oh, did you turn gay because you were in prison?" And it was nothing like that, never been molested, nothing like that. I just had these tendencies from very young. I mean, when my cousins were playing with their Barbie dolls, I was playing with my GI Joe. I just yeah, but I knew it wasn't right, but I was really confused. And I think that's why that had the reason why I did start using drugs a lot, because I didn't know how to deal with it. I couldn't come out and talk with it. I think my mother knew. My brothers and my sisters, they didn't know until later on in the game as I got older, but yeah, I was just so confused as a child, as a teenager, because I didn't know how to deal with it. I really didn't. And like
Yeah.
I say, back in my day, it was like it was all hush hush. You didn't come out and you just say, "Okay, I'm gay." You couldn't do that back
Yeah.
then,
I,
you know.
yeah, that was the same in my day too.
Right.
Um, so then, and you were involved in, like, gay pride parades, dykes on bikes. Were you part of the dykes on bikes?
Yes, I did. I
That,
used
because a lot of people don't know what that is. Explain what that is.
Dykes on Bikes is where they have a parade, they have the Pride Parade, and we ride through it on our motorcycles. There was a bunch of us women and all us dykes, I guess, and we all had motorcycles. And we would ride through the parade. And we did this every year. I did this every year for a long time, because I was so
And
involved.
it was this in Los Angeles,
Yes, yes, in
in
Los
West
Angeles.
Hollywood, right?
Right, right, West Hollywood, where they
Wow.
had the Pride. Yes.
We probably overlapped at the pride parades.
We probably
I was
did.
there all in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yes, I
Um,
was there.
yeah, I probably saw you riding your motorcycle. And so after all of this, you're at a certain point, your mother gets cancer, and this is kind of a turning point for you. So talk about
Right,
that.
right. Well, it's kind of strange because my mother had cancer and we all came together as a family to take care of my mother. We moved out of our homes and came back and moved in the family home. And we were each taking care of my mother. We had shifts because we all still worked and everything. And we all had our time with, our mother. And I'll never forget because I used to hang out with my mom at night because I worked during the day. And then when I came home from work, I'd relieve my one brother. And then I'd come in and I'd just be with my mom. And I remember when she was on her deathbed, we talked, we had a lot of good things to talk about. My mom talked about God and she talked about wishing that I would come to know God better. And by that time I was already like I said, I had one foot in and one foot out because um well I'll go back after this. As far as with my mother and my mother said something. She was very smart. I think about it today. And I said, Mom, is there anything that you want from me or anything you want to hear from me? And she just said, I want to see you in heaven. She goes, I want to see you in heaven. And Beckett, when you're in the moment, you're just like, well, for me, I was like, oh yeah, yeah, Mom, you'll see me, no problem, this and that. And so I let it go. And then my mom passed and we went through the grieving process and our family came closer together. And when all was done and well, and we all went to back to our homes and stuff, I remember being home and I would pray a lot at this point, you know. I still wasn't, I don't want to say I was completely saved because I used to get saved all the time. I would go to a church, when they do the altar call, I would go up there and then I think I was saved. And then for the week, I'd go back out in the week and I'd mess up and then I'd come back to church again. I was doing this weekly. So I thought I was only being saved for the week, right? And so when I was at home, one night my friend was in the hospital and she was going through alcoholism and she was, you know, she was dying. She was literally dying. And I just fell on my hands and knees and I was like, Lord, you know, I was praying for my friend. And then all of a sudden that thought came in from my mom saying, I want to see you in heaven. I heard it clearly in my
And
head.
how old were you at this time?
I was, oh my gosh, I was like 45 in my 50s. I was in my late
Okay.
50s. Right. And so so I heard this and I was like, oh my gosh. And I had already cleaned up. I had already stopped the gang lifestyle. I had stopped the drugs already. My life was going forward now at this point in time. So when I was on my knees and I was praying and I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, mom, you are so smart. That's the first thing that came in my head because the only way I could get to heaven is if I gave up this lifestyle. See, I thought I was all good because I stopped the drugs, I stopped the gang lifestyle, I stopped everything, but I still was living the lifestyle of homosexuality.
Mhm.
So when that came to mind, I was like, oh wow, this is something I really have to give up. And I kind of wanted it at the time, but I was still holding on. You
Yeah.
know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like hard for me, but when I got on my hands and knees and I cried out, and I mean I cried like a baby, it was like boom. It was like an instant delivery, just the way he delivered me from heroin. The same thing. When back then, when I got on my hands and knees and I prayed for him to take this addiction away, and it was instantaneously when he did with my heroin addiction, and the same thing with this the tendencies of being gay. And I couldn't believe it. And I even tested myself. This is how I went to the local mall and I would like to people watch a lot. So I went and sat on a bench, and this was like maybe an hour after this incident happened. And I'm sitting in the local mall and I'm watching people go by. And then I see like a young woman, a nice looking woman, and nothing, I mean, I was, I don't know how to explain it, but there was no like wow or anything. And then I seen a guy walk by and I was like, oh, this guy has some nice abs on him, and I've never said that before, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I even went back to, because I used to go to gay churches. I was searching for God, and I would go to these gay churches. And so I went back to the gay church after all this happened, and I was like, I'm not supposed to be here. I had these
Mm.
feelings like, and I'd walk out in the middle of the sermon, because I was like, no, I'm not supposed to be here. This is not the place for me, and little by little, I was like, well, okay, Lord, what do I do next? And I mean, I literally dressed like a man. Okay. I was a little boy back then. I should have pictures for you. But yeah, I was just like, okay, what do I do next? And so people that I talked to, people in the church, they were like, the Lord was just going to take care of it for you. Just let him do his work. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And I didn't know how to dress. And I had a friend, and we'd go to the mall, and she'd want to buy me like all these girly clothes. And I was like, no, 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 that's too much right now. Let's just do it a little bit at a time. So little at a time, God just started changing my heart. And I was amazed because I knew God did miracles, because God had done several miracles in my life in the past, as far as, getting out of the lifestyles I was in. And, it just, I was just scared, I guess, because I was like, okay, because I was always like a tomboy growing up. I always played with the guys and I'd always, fight with them and everything. And so I wasn't like that girly girl that dressed up in little dresses and stuff. To this day,
Hmm.
I don't wear dresses, but I do dress up nice.
Yes.
But yeah, so little by little, God just started showing me how to like do hairstyles. I had friends that they loved it coming over and just doing my hair and putting on the makeup. And, it was like I had makeovers every week.
That's
But
amazing. So
yeah,
when did you find, after like trying to go to these gay churches, when did you find a real church, like a good church?
um, actually, oh gosh, in the early, I want to say like the early 2000s, because I was going, I was I was going to gay churches and then I was going to Calvary Chapel, Diamond Bar, Pastor Raul Reese. And I got involved in the ministry there. It's called the Whosoevers. And that's the son, Pastor Rawls' son. And they go out and they speak to kids and everything. So Ryan had asked me if I would speak on homosexuality because I was just like coming into, as far as like the godly life, right?
Hmm.
So I got really involved with them. And it was like the early 2000s, late 1999, I think. Um, and I started serving and I got like really involved in Calvary Chapel, Diamond Bar. And I started ushering and I started doing all like different ministries, going back actually with Ryan Reese with the Whosoevers. I told him there were like three of us ladies, and we were like, we're the oldest Whosoevers because they're like all younger kids, and they talk to the schools and everything. But Ryan goes worldwide today, and I did a lot of praying on young kids that were struggling with homosexuality, praying for them and just talking to them, sharing my story with them, coming from all walks of life, and I loved it. The more I got involved with it, I loved it. And then my brother, Pastor Marty Salaya, he would ask me, oh, come to my church, because he had opened his church about 6 years ago. And I was like, I don't know, this is my church, and I was afraid to leave. And so he kept asking me and kept asking me. And then I guess he finally came to me and he was like, well, you can do worship here because I sing. I used to sing in secular, was with some bands in the secular era.
Yeah.
But when he said that, I was like, oh wow, I have a talent. And like when I was gonna audition for Calvary Chapel, I got scared because there were like a lot of younger kids doing it. And I thought, no, I'm too old to do this. But I do have a talent. God has given me a talent. So I did. I prayed and prayed. I talked to my pastor, and Pastor Raw told me, go, it's time for you to go now. And I was scared, but I did. I went, and I've been going to Encouragement Community Church ever since for the last 6 years.
Wow.
And
What did your brothers think when you became a Christian?
my brothers have been praying for many years, many years, because I put this family through, well, I don't know if I can say it. I put them through
A
everything.
lot.
Yeah, a lot. So yeah, they were amazed. I think they were still kind of leery, to be honest with you. Like I felt like I had to show myself, but then my brother Marty and Eric, I could tell sometimes I felt like they were like, okay, is she really all in or not? But the more and more they saw how committed I was, and how being consistently, you know, like coming to church and tithing and just doing everything that you're supposed to do as a Christian, and then some, you know, they I know they were overly joyed. I know that. I know my mother was, because I was able, before she died, I was able to tell her that I was going to church. I wasn't as fully committed, but she was happy knowing I was going to church. And I think my mother knew, I think she had it in her heart to know that someday, I was gonna come to God. Her prayers had actually, after all these years, my whole family, they prayed constantly for me,
Yeah.
constant. Like I say, sometimes I feel like, how in the Bible, Hezekiah, how God gave him 15 more years. Well, I always say, God, you gave me like 30 plus more years, because I'm still alive.
Yeah,
And
but that's the same thing with my family. Like I have 7 siblings. I'm the youngest of 8, and my parents and all my siblings are Christians, and they all just prayed for me and prayed for me, especially my mother, and prayed and prayed and prayed for 20 years, and God answered their prayers.
right, right.
Yeah.
You know,
So that's like prayer. I try to tell people this all the time because especially with this issue of homosexuality, I just people ask me all the time, like, what do I do? What do I do? I'm like, pray, just
right,
pray. Because this is like a battle, this is a spiritual battle. It's like not, you can't do anything in the natural. You just have to pray.
exactly,
Because your
exactly,
mom wasn't going to be able to control you when you were a wild kid and running around. Like she wasn't going to be able to control you, right?
exactly, exactly. Nobody could at that point.
Yeah, only God, only the Holy Spirit can convict you of sin, and then you're like, oh,
Right,
okay.
right. And that's what I tell people too, like coming out of like the lifestyle I came out of, because people, like, well, you were in a gang and you were in an organization, and how do you just let go of that? And I say, God can do miracles. God is so good today. And I honestly believe, like, I know that God had a purpose for me, because I always used to say, I was on my deathbed like 7 times back then, literally on my deathbed. And I I would be like, why, God? Why are you bringing me back? Or why are you letting me live again? And I would question him a lot, but now I know what my purpose is. And I even go beyond, like, in the work I do. I'm a caregiver today, and I get to witness to my clients, and I love it. I can share the gospel with them, and I don't, they don't know my whole story. I just, because I have to have my boundaries,
Yeah,
but, but I go and I'm able to preach the gospel every day. And that's the awesome part of my day, when I
I
go to,
know. There's nothing more fun and more exciting than sharing the gospel with somebody. It's like whenever
yeah,
I'm at like the grocery store or wherever I am, like or at a coffee shop, and I get to share the gospel, I'm like, it just makes my day. It makes me
right.
so excited.
Yes, yes. And
Wow.
I just I'm so thankful, because, like, after I gave myself to the Lord, I started attending church and Bible studies, and that's how I got more involved. And then I went back to college to become a drug and alcohol counselor and a domestic violence counselor, because I came out of those things. I came out of the drug world. I was in a domestic violence relationship. And so I took that very seriously. And, like, I never finished high school. I had to go back to get my GED. But when I went to college, I was really proud. And I know my brothers and my family were very proud of me, because it was something that I actually accomplished, and I got very involved in it. And that was another job that I was able to witness. When I do groups, like, we're not allowed to talk about God. But if somebody asked me a question like, Lisa, how did you change? How did you get out of this life? And boom, there it was. That was the open door. So
Wow.
I lived a lot, not me, God did it, because God worked through me. And when sharing and doing a group, I mean, we would have groups like on God, people wanting to know how to change. It was awesome. It was so
Wow.
awesome. Yes,
That's amazing.
yes,
Your story is so incredible, and praise God that he saved you.
yeah, yes, yes.
Praise God.
You know,
Um, yeah.
I mean, there's just so much, like I say, back when, going through the things I went through, I even thought there was no hope, because I was so, like, back in the gangs. I got so involved in it. So I thought that was my life. I thought that was the only life you could live. And being introduced to the organization, that was even crazier because, you know, you cannot get out of these organizations.
Hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
how, but God got me out, you know.
He rescued you. I love it.
He sure did. He sure did. God is so good, you know, and anybody out there, if they're struggling, if you feel you're struggling with homosexuality or anything, addiction, whatever the case may be, just know that if you look up, if you look to God, God will rescue you, because there's people out there that have stories upon stories. We all have our own testimony, you know, but God is our savior, and God will make a way. He will make a way. When one door closes, another one opens. You know that
Amen.
one, right?
Amen to that. Well,
Yes.
we're gonna leave it there. Thank you, Lisa, for coming on the show and sharing that story, your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Beckett, for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, God bless you, and we will see you guys next week.